Okay, I'm going to talk about the four phases of emergency management. Then I'm going to talk about locally how we implemented that with Hurricane Florence here in the Winston-Salem, Forsyth County area, which is governed by our Emergency Operations Center, 725 North Cherry Street. Our police department issues the warnings via email to all city personnel, is one of the channels. But also Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Emergency Management work in close concert with police, fire, and Forsyth County EMS to implement our emergency disaster preparedness plan for the area. So first we're going to talk about the four phases of emergency management. Emergency management was institutionalized in 1979 with the creation of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agencies. 5 federal agencies that dealt with many types of emergencies consolidated to form FEMA. Since that time, many state and local organizations have changed the name of their organizations to include the words emergency management. Legally, many states require that local jurisdictions provide for the position of emergency program manager. At each level of government, laws define the responsibility and authority of emergency managers and management programs. If you know how emergency management works at various government levels, you can coordinate your personal preparedness plans with official community plans. And again, a little later on, we'll talk about official community plans for Winston-Salem, Forsyth County area. Since World War II, emergency management has focused primarily on preparedness. And often, since emergency management had military origins, it's often involved preparing for enemy attack. Community preparedness requires identifying resources and expertise in advance and planning how these can be used in disasters. But preparedness is only one phase of emergency management. Current thinking defines 4 phases of emergency management: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. There's a lot of information on each of these phases. We're just going to briefly go over these phases. First, we'll start with mitigation. Mitigation is defined as preventing future emergencies or minimizing the effects of disasters. It includes any activities that prevent an emergency, reduce the chance of an emergency happening, or reduce the damaging effects of unavoidable emergencies. It also includes buying flood and fire insurance for one's home. This is a mitigation activity. It's a very controversial portion of that mitigation phase as well, flood insurance particularly, and the financial impact. And also mitigation activities take place before and after emergencies. And actually, that's one of the misunderstandings about mitigation, that it simply has to do with minimizing, reducing the damage of emergencies before they occur. But actually, after they occur, is really, and assessing that damage is really one of the only ways a hazard can properly be mitigated. In the fire service, we had a captain, Jeff Heitman, and after a fire, and after we put the fire out, he would say, "Fire under control, hazard mitigated." So after a fire, that's one example of how a hazard is mitigated. In other words, we secure the scene. Before we leave the scene and turn the scene over, we've secured it. We've done everything we can to make sure the fire hasn't done any more damage to the structure, and make sure we secure any property that could be secured. And we've done all we can from a medical standpoint for any life safety purposes or for any emergency medical purposes. We've minimized the damage from that disaster. That's just, a fire is a small scale emergency. So that's examples of mitigation, or definition rather of mitigation. Preparedness means preparedness, just that, preparing to handle an emergency. Well, what are some things included in preparedness? Preparedness includes plans or preparations made to save lives and to help response and rescue operations, according to FEMA. Um, Evacuation plans, stocking food and water are both examples of preparedness, and preparedness activities take place before an emergency occurs. And some good examples of this preparedness from a local perspective is City of Winston-Salem government website actually has a good before Hurricane Florence, which we're going to discuss a little bit later on, has had a good portion, which actually on the website you can go to storm preparedness, and emergency management worked in concert with the city to show on the website how to pack a to-go bag and certain things one would need as far as water, perishables. A lot of people think about canned goods, but actually one of the good suggestions I read on the website was, it might have been on another emergency preparedness website, was to pack for like you're packing for a picnic. So sandwiches, lunch meat, things of that nature, because oftentimes when preparing for disaster, people that have actually been through hurricanes, things of that nature, will find they eat more like a picnic, like packing a school lunch, because you might be 1 or 2 weeks away from a home or in a hotel or motel or at a family's house resident. And usually lunch meat and things we pack for lunch we usually keep for 3 to 4 days. And so that's the time you usually would take to travel to another location wherever we would be staying if we had to evacuate. And oftentimes people say, canned goods are okay, but really you can pack lunch meat and sandwiches and things of that nature, chips and drinks like you would pack at a school lunch and pack for a picnic. And it'd actually be more of an enjoyable experience. And that's one of the things that I got from the website actually preparing my family. We had packed two to-go bags for Hurricane Florence, and we prepared batteries and flashlights and things, all the normal things that go in a to-go bag. And I believe it's still, the city website still has that page up, but it's because the experience, you want to make it enjoyable as possible. It's already kind of a miserable experience traveling with all these kids, and your home having damage and things of that nature. So for those who went through it, there's really good tips on how to pack a to-go bag. Excuse me. But packing an evacuation bag, or quote-unquote to-go bag, making evacuation plans, stocking food and water are all examples of preparedness. The response phase is the third phase. Response is just that, again, responding safely to an emergency. They include actions taken to save lives and prevent further property damage in an emergency situation. Now, response sounds kind of like mitigation when it talks about preventing further damage or minimizing damage, but response is actually putting preparedness plans into action. For instance, seeking shelter from a tornado, turning off gas valves in an earthquake are both response activities. And again, on a small scale emergency for a house fire, one of the truck company functions during a fire attack is actually to go around the house and turn off, it's called utility function. I was on a truck company for about 3.5 years, 2 different truck companies, and the utility response is to turn off the power to the electrical box, turn off the gas to the house from the outside, things of that nature. Monitor for safety, make sure a lot of times when the house catches on fire, the heat will melt the lines, the power lines. The power lines will actually fall down on the lawn and will cause a hazard. A lot of times these lines are still live, and it'll cause a hazard to the firefighters, because the supports that kept the lines in the air actually, those actually fail. Those elements fail, and those lines a lot of times will end up on the ground, and that line will still be live. It could hurt or possibly injure or possibly kill one of the firefighters that are fighting the fire. So one of the things the truck company does, along with the safety in that incident, and also alongside with the incident command, which is usually a battalion chief, will look out for those utilities and make sure that the firefighters are safe, and will turn off any utilities that might be on in the event of a fire, because in a house fire, you still have live power. Well, the structures and those parts that held up those, for instance, those electrical cables may fail, and you may find yourself exposed to very high voltages in very dangerous circumstances. And the same thing with, obviously, gas is obviously would be very dangerous when it mixes with fire, and that will be a combustible gas in that incident. So it's very important to turn those utilities off. Well, that's part of the response phase in that emergency. And so response activities take place during an emergency. And finally, the recovery phase. The recovery phase is just that recovering from an emergency. And what's included in the recovery phase? Recovery phase includes actions taken to return to a normal or an even safer situation following an emergency. Recovery includes getting financial assistance to help pay for the repair and any activities that take place after an emergency. So again, relating it to a smaller scale, to a house fire, which of course I'm most familiar with as a firefighter. Recovery activities would be like what we do. This city does in coordination with the Red Cross. And what the Red Cross function is for the city of Winston-Salem is, after a house fire, they will arrange for a few days for a motel for the family until the family can get settled and get with perhaps other family members or find other arrangements, sometimes at the shelter after a house fire, or make arrangements for a company like After Disaster to come and repair anything that fire damage from the home, if it's in fact repairable. Give an opportunity for the insurance agent to get there and assess the damage. Give an opportunity that time for those repairs to be made. All these things will be included on that small scale disaster in the recovery process. Any financial assistance and thing involved with insurance that help pay for the repair of that home. Now, on a larger scale, of course, you're talking in some cases millions or billions of dollars. In the case of Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, those very large scale disasters, you're talking in billions of dollars, and it's still recovering from that large scale disaster. So recovery is one of the longest and most tenuous parts of the 4 phases of emergency management. It's usually the most expensive and the most has the most financial cost. The largest financial cost associated with it is that recovery phase. Okay, so those are basically the 4 phases of emergency management: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Now, emergency management works when local, state, and federal government fulfill emergency management responsibilities. We talked a little bit about FEMA. Now, FEMA, of course, one of the reasons that there has to be documentation that takes place during an emergency is because all of these bills have to be submitted to the federal government for recompensation. And so there has to be strenuous record keeping during an emergency or disaster, so those funds can be submitted to the federal government. However, during an emergency, voluntary organizations have a lot of responsibilities, like we mentioned, the Red Cross, but also a lot of governmental organizations assist. Salvation Army, a lot of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, assist. Volunteer organizations, religious groups. My religious group, Jehovah's Witnesses, we assist a lot in after disaster, helping rebuild not just the houses of other Jehovah's Witnesses, but a lot of people in the area. We help assist a lot. We do a lot of work, in fact, in the after disaster care, and in the recovery phase of the individual's home, especially after hurricanes and so forth, where we're very strenuous in that, very active in that area. And so, volunteer organizations actually help a lot, contribute a lot during disasters and after. But the state really and local government during the disaster, of course, have a lot of responsibility as well. And especially, we're going to talk about the mitigation and preparedness phases. I'm going to read to you. I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to read to you the hurricane statement. Again, that was issued by our Emergency Operations Center at 725 North Cherry Street. And 725 North Cherry Street, we refer to it as KUJ. Really, it's the dispatch center for police and fire department. And we actually communicate with the county, which is on Airport Road, off of Liberty Street, and with KUJ. But KUJ, 725 North Cherry Street, is our Emergency Operations Center, and it's where we get our warnings for events like Hurricane Florence. And I'm going to read the warning from the police department, specifically Jerry L. Cruz, our SPSCO for Communications Division, Winston-Salem Police Department, and what he issued to the city in preparation for Hurricane Florence. It says October 11th, 2018, Michael. I said Florence. Tropical Storm Michael, Local State Advisory Number 19, National Weather Service, Raleigh, North Carolina. So Hurricane Michael will move across central North Carolina this morning through this evening. Tropical storm warning has been issued for Alamance, Chatham, Davidson, Forsyth, Guilford, Orange, Person, and Randolph. Current watches and warnings. The tropical storm warning is in effect for Alamance, Anson, Chatham, Cumberland, Davidson, Durham, Edgecombe, Forsyth, Franklin, Granville, Guilford, Halifax, Harnett, Hope, Johnston, Lee, Montgomery, Moore, Nash, Orange, Person, Randolph, Richmond, Sampson, Scotland, Stanley, Vance, Wake, Warren, Wayne, and Wilson. And then it gets up to the individual counties and municipal departments, whether it be volunteer or municipal departments, It's up to those local departments to then take this warning and implement any measures necessary for the mitigation phase, the preparedness and recovery phase. And it says here, storm information about 270 miles southwest of Raleigh, North Carolina, or about 230 miles southwest of Greensboro, North Carolina. Storm intensity 50 miles per hour. Movement northeast of 45 degrees to 21 miles per hour. Why is this important? Well, take for instance a storm like Hurricane Katrina. Now, Hurricane Katrina had winds of 100 miles per hour when they got this warning to local municipalities. Now, however, local standard operational guidelines for their water rescue department was they could not be deployed with winds over 55 miles per hour. So therefore, it delayed some of the rescue efforts. What happened was some of the police and fire department members were taking their own taking boats and rescuing people, going against the operational guidelines just out of the goodness of their hearts. And then you had the National Guard and individuals, and a lot of individuals perished because there was a learning moment, it was a teaching moment really for that organization, for the New Orleans Police Department, for the fire department, really for the entire state and local government, and for the federal government, obviously FEMA, because the operational guidelines were actually tied the hands of the water rescue department. And so that's important, like that storm intensity. It might not seem like to the layman, but to the emergency responder, this information is of relevance. It said remnants of Michael will impact central North Carolina this morning through this evening. Storm total rainfalls of 3 to 6 inches with locally higher amounts can be expected. This is important for knowing the flood map and just as a municipality, what areas will flood. I know, for example, the northwest side will flood by the movie theater on Monona Road. Haynes Mall will flood by the mall. I know the low-lying areas in my particular area on the south side of Winston, and it's kind of a high point where we are, where the fire station is located on 771 Palmer Lane. But just kind of knowing that going down towards Cloister and going down Silas Creek, you'll have flooding. Silas Creek is actually a creek there. And so ones may be called for water rescue in those areas. And you have to know the approximate amount of rainfall that's going to fall. It says actually this rainfall could result in flash flooding, particularly in low-lying and poor drainage areas. The Triad and Triangle metro areas are at particular high risk of flash flooding due to very high rainfall rates along with excessive urban runoff. Due to this heavy rainfall, river flooding ranging from minor across eastern North Carolina to moderate and major flooding across central and western portions of North Carolina will begin as early as tonight and linger into next week. Finally, there's potential for an isolated and short-lived tornado Thursday afternoon into the early evening. So this is very important. This goes on, and I had to kind of make it more concise because I'm running close. I'm actually at 20 minutes. But I had to make it kind of concise. And we actually even received more concise information in specific reference to us as a fire department. And I'm going to relay that fairly quickly because my time is up. But we actually had an incident action plan safety analysis. This is actually in reference to Hurricane Florence. And I apologize, I got it mixed up. But our incident action plan safety analysis, I'm going to read Hurricane Florence, which was 1 month previous to what I just read. So this is September 13th to September 16th, 2018. And this is just some of the individual, as part of the mitigation and part of the preparedness phase, some of the individual direction that we got as a fire department. Our hazard risk and mitigations were barricading well-known flood areas, recognizing the hazard, make sure we have the correct PPE on. For instance, water rescue, do not wear full turnout gear or firefighter helmet and boots and things of that nature, because obviously it's a water rescue, it's different PPE. So having that prepared ahead of time, making sure that it's clean, make sure that it's fit and there's enough issued to all the personnel. Making sure companies deploy water rescue teams early. We had extra companies on standby. Of course, that overtime and the monies for that overtime would be part of the recovery phase, because that you're paying individuals overtime to prepare for water rescue efforts. Assume all the electricity is live unless you have the capability to shut it down. That came into play because I worked during the storm, and there was a lot of lines down, and one of them was live on a car with the individuals whose ankle was broken, sticking out of the bone, and we could not touch that car for a amount of time because it was a possibility it was live, and we had to wait. And the individual, he turned out okay, but he was screaming in agony. But because we had operational guidelines, we had to make sure that we were very cautious around live lines. But these incident action plans, safety analysis are very important before and after incident to go over with the crew, especially for officers such as myself. Be aware of electrical hazard. Treat all lines live until proven otherwise. Observe safety, chainsaw safety. Have PPE. We have chaps, helmets, face shields. So we had to cut a lot of trees, even that were in the road, and I had to drive around a lot of different trees that fell in the road. In my territory specifically, we had maybe 10 or 11 different roads that were cut off because of trees. Sometimes we had no other way to go. We had to take the chainsaw off, cut the trees up, move them out of the roadway. More often than not, we just went around them. But it added to response time for we had to respond to the emergency, and that has to be planned for. And oftentimes what we would do was drive around even before the emergency to see which routes we could take, and then have good communication with the previous crews and the crews that were relieving us, so we could let them know which routes were shut off. Be observant of conditions, slow down, avoid driving on flooded roads. If you see more than 3 inches of water, turn around. If you can't tell how much water it is, turn around. You usually can get a good gauge as a driver how much water it is, but you definitely don't want to flood the fire truck out and get stalled in water, or worse, get swept away in the current, which we didn't have to worry about that, but you definitely had to worry about getting stalled out. Or hitting objects that could be unseen, could be hidden in the water. All these things are part of preparation and mitigation as well. And just to be vigilant, command staff has the option to suspend medical response in these areas. We have what's called storm mode. So some emergencies that we would normally address when there was no storm, some medical emergencies, we would suspend and only address fire, rescue, and hazardous materials response emergencies. So this is some example of how we implement the 4 phases of emergency management on a local level. This is Jesse McLemore for Emergency Management, Chief Peace Class. Thank you for your time.